people were presenting it as a vote on the court for or against same-sex marriage. But that's not what the opinion was about. What the opinion was about was who gets to decide. The dissenters weren't taking a view. In fact, Chief Justice Roberts' dissent was very explicit about that. He said, those who want same-sex marriage, you have every right to lobby in state legislatures to make that happen. But the dissent's view was that it wasn't for the court to decide, that the Constitution didn't speak to the question, and so that it was a change that should occur through the legislative process.
Welcome back to AM Joy. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Senate confirmation hearings will begin Monday. For the Supreme Court seat, Senate Republicans are attempting to steal a mere 3 weeks before the election. If successful, the confirmation of Trump's nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, would not only threaten health care and reproductive rights, but also have dire consequences for the hard-fought rights won by other marginalized groups. One such right is same-sex marriage, which was decided in a 5-4 ruling by the Supreme Court in the 2015 Obergefell case. And that clip you just saw caused alarm for gay rights activists, given how Judge Barrett openly flaunts that she is ideologically in line with one of the dissenters, her late mentor, Justice Antonin Scalia.
I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine too. A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold.
This week, 5 years after many of us presumed marriage equality to be settled law, 2 of the other dissenters in that landmark case, Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, came out and blasted the decision, saying it left, quote, those with religious objections in the lurch, and that, quote, the court has created a problem only it can fix. Today is National Coming Out Day, and our focus on the danger posed to LGBTQ rights comes on the eve of the 22nd anniversary of another turning point in the fight for the rights of LGBTQ Americans.
The victim of what many people say was a hate crime in Wyoming this morning has died. 21-year-old Matthew Shepard was found beaten and unconscious last week near the University of Wyoming. Shepard was gay, and while police say robbery was the primary motive for the attack, gay rights groups call it a hate crime.
At the time of Matthew Shepard's brutal murder, hate crime laws did not protect Americans based on their sexual orientation. And after years of struggling to get it passed, Congress eventually sent the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Act to President Obama, who signed it into law in 2009. And joining me now are Dennis and Judy Shepard, the parents of Matthew and the founders of the Matthew Shepard Foundation, and Alphonso David, president of the Human Rights Campaign. Dennis and Judy and Alphonso, thank you very much for coming on the show today. I should point out and disclose that in 2016, I was honored to receive a Making a Difference award from the Matthew Shepard Foundation. So thank you again for that. And Dennis and Judy, let me start with you. Given the tenor and tone of the conversation that the country is engaged in, particularly in this election campaign, how concerned are you that the Supreme Court will take a hammer to the hard-fought rights that LGBTQ Americans have fought so hard to obtain?
Well, it's certainly a fear, and I think it's justified based on the Senate's hypocrisy. We should let the people decide, I think, on the replacement seat. But if we have a court that is so set on not helping marginalized communities achieve equality, I think we're all in trouble.
Dennis, let me pull you into this. I mean, again, tomorrow is the 22nd anniversary. The country has changed a lot when it comes to its views of LGBTQ Americans, the laws and the rights that have been won by the community. But how concerned are you that all the hard work that the Matthew Shepard Foundation has been working on is on the potentially on the cusp of being eroded?
Well, one thing you got to remember is, number one, we have a law. We also have precedents that these people, the LGBTQ community, has been living out in the public eye for years now, and people are starting to realize they're just ordinary, boring people too, just like the straight community. And that's the important thing. They're hardworking citizens. They have families. They just want to have a career, and they love their country. There's no difference. That's why I can't understand what the problem is. This country is a democracy. It's not a theocracy. And trying to base something like that on other aspects of the country just confuses me.
Yes, and we know from recent polls, right, that the country largely is in favor of equality for the gay community. So listen to the voters. Do what they want to do, not what your previous thoughts were. It's a new world. So get with the program.
So, Judy, let me stick with you for one more minute. So if you had an opportunity to talk to Judge Amy Coney Barrett, what would you tell her?
Well, parent to parent, mom to mom, I would say, Amy, if your child comes out as gay, I hope you understand that that's who they are. It's not their choice. It's nothing you did. It's just who they are. People are people. And I would hate to think that you would reject one of your children because they happen to be gay. We're all humans trying to fight for the same things, which is acceptance and a good life and safety in our workplace and in our homes. And I hope that she would recognize that as a human being.
Alphonso David, president of the Human Rights Campaign, you penned an op-ed for the August Washington Post with Mr. Obergefell, talking about the danger posed to the LGBT community by the Supreme Court. Talk more about it, more specifically about what's at stake with the Supreme Court.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. The LGBTQ community is in a state of crisis, and this election could be the turning point. We have hit the highest number of anti-transgender deaths from violence than any other year since we've tracked it. Justice Thomas and Alito, as you mentioned before, have declared an open war on marriage equality. And we have LGBTQ people are dying of the pandemic and suffering significant economic impacts. 1 out of 5 LGBTQ people live in poverty. So what does a Coney Barrett confirmation mean? Our relationships are threatened. Our access to government services are threatened. Our access to services provided to any other member of the public are threatened. In short, an appointment of Judge Amy Coney Barrett simply means that we will become second-class citizens. Our marriages between same-sex couples become skim milk marriages. We are denied access to health care. We're denied the ability to be foster and adoptive parents. We're denied services that anyone else can get in the public square. This is a significant concern for members of the LGBTQ community. We know that there are 57 million voters in this country. The majority of people, equality voters, I should say, the majority of people are saying the next justice should be selected by the next president. And instead of heeding those words, the Senate majority and President Trump are trying to jam through this nomination and it's going to have significant collateral consequences on the lives of LGBTQ people and marginalized communities.
And one of those collateral problems is something that was pointed out in another Washington Post story here, where it says the court is set to hear oral arguments in a case that could significantly scale back LGBTQ rights on November 4th, the day after the election. In Fulton v. Philadelphia, private agencies that receive taxpayer funding to provide government services, such as foster care agencies, food banks, and homeless shelters, could be given a constitutional right to deny services not just to people who are LGBTQ, but even to religious groups such as Jews, Muslims, or Mormons. So this gets to what you were just talking about, doesn't it, Alphonso?
Oh, absolutely. And for context, more than 40% of children who are homeless are LGBTQ. And those children go through, in many cases, through the foster care system. Now, if you are a foster care agency or adoptive agency and you do business with the government, you're receiving monies from the government in order to provide these services. What these agencies are attempting to do is effectively say, we're going to deny same-sex couples the right to be foster parents, deny religious minorities the ability to be foster parents, deny single women, because they believe that it's inconsistent with the tenets of their faith. We have religious liberties in this country, but what they're trying to do is create exemptions to supersede individual rights. We should all have the right to exercise our fundamental rights, and our fundamental rights should not be subjected to additional religious exemptions. The First Amendment has existed for decades, but so has the 14th Amendment. And this case is really significant for same-sex couples, for single women, for religious minorities all over the country.
Dennis and Judy, given what's happening in the country right now and the work of the foundation, I'm wondering what you're hearing from the LGBT community about what's going on. How concerned or afraid are the people you work with and talk to?
Well, I think everybody's afraid. Everybody we've talked to, as Alphonso was saying, the rise in hate crimes and the lack of interest by the current DOJ scares us all. We are definitely in a very different time now when things are working against us rather than for us, as they did in the Obama-Biden administration. So just regular LGBT folks and folks who are working as advocates, we're all nervous about what's going to happen, and not just in the courts, but legislatively too, which is why everybody's saying, you all got to have a plan to vote and get out there and do it.
Dennis, let me give you...
Something I emphasize all the time is that we have two sons, one straight and one gay, if Matt was alive today. Why aren't they equal? One of them has all the rights of an American. He's our straight son, but our gay son wouldn't have all the same rights. Why? They're both born in this country. They both pay taxes. They both want to serve. They love their country. So you tell me what the difference is between the two.
And that is an excellent question to leave this part of the conversation. Dennis and Judy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Dennis and Judy Shepard and Alphonso David, president of the Human Rights Campaign, thank you very much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And now, joining the conversation is Pete Buttigieg, former presidential candidate and author of the brand new book, Trust. Pete, it is great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Same here. Thanks for having me on.
So this whole segment is talking about what's happening with the Supreme Court and the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Since I've got you sitting here, tell me your views about this nomination and your views on this particular nominee.
Well, of course, like most Americans, I believe that the winner of this presidential election ought to make the decision about who's going to fill this seat. And by the way, we're not talking about an election day coming up. We're talking about an election underway. Millions of Americans have already voted, and those votes ought to be part of the decision-making process here. So there's a process question, but more importantly, there's a substance question. There's a question about our rights. The bottom line is my family, my marriage, this household that I live in, legally exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think about what it would have been like if that single vote had been a Justice Barrett instead of a Justice Ginsburg. I literally might not be a married man right now. So, this is not some academic concern or some arcane question. This is about our lives in a very immediate sense. And this is nothing personal about the appointee. This is about the philosophy, the ideology that is driving these appointments, driven by a far right that is out of step with the American people on issue after issue, whether it's LGBTQ rights and marriage equality, or whether it's healthcare, which is also very much on the line right now as this decision, this ACA case approaches the Supreme Court, perhaps voting rights and other questions. The decisions they make in that building, they come down into our most intimate dimensions of life. And that's what's at stake for me right now. It's not about her. It's about the decisions that are going to be made.
You know, as you say, it is about our lives. I was reminded of the tweet that your husband, Chasten Buttigieg, sent out, where the tweet says, staring at this wedding ring, thinking of what SCOTUS means to our lives, our families, our marriages, our rights. I need you to vote. We all need you to vote. Mayor Pete, and I still call you Mayor Pete, even though you are no longer mayor of South Bend, Indiana. You know, as I noted at the start in the introduction of this segment, that today is National Coming Out Day. As an openly gay man, married man, for those folks who are LGBT and especially Q who might be watching, what would you tell them if they are struggling with coming out and how to do it?
The most important thing I want them to hear is I'm rooting for you. I know that this can be incredibly challenging, and for different people in different ways. Some people have the sense of who they are and the readiness and the willingness to come out when they're teenagers. I was a grown man, a mayor of a city in a position of responsibility. I owned a house, and I found it extremely challenging to come out. In my 30s, some people are seniors and are know that they're at a moment in their lives when it's just time. You're ready when you're ready, and I can't promise that it will always be easy. But I can promise that there is an extraordinary community of people who care about you and who support you as you're going through this process. And when you are ready, you know, I will be one who will be there to welcome you and to urge you to stand up and be proud. And the other thing that I think is important for people to think about, because you're often understandably wrapped up in your own fears and concerns, is to remember that when you make a decision to come out, to be who you are, to let others know who you are, someone you might not even realize might be looking to you, might be looking up to you, and might know that they have a better chance of acceptance from seeing you live into who you really are.
Mayor Pete, that's so moving what you have to say to people who might be struggling with whether and how to come out. As you were speaking, I was handed, this is just in, Amy Coney Barrett's opening statement tomorrow has been released. And I want to read to you one part of that statement where she writes, "When I write an opinion resolving a case, I read every word from the perspective of the losing party. I ask myself, how would I view the decision if one of my children was the party I was ruling against? Even though I would not like the result, would I understand that the decision was fairly reasoned and grounded in the law?" Mayor Pete, what do you make of that?
Fairly reasoned and grounded in the law. Well, you know, two of her would-be colleagues, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, wrote a memo last week essentially putting marriage equality back on the table in their minds. So if she really wants to understand the party she might rule against, I guess I would invite her to follow that process and put herself in the shoes of somebody who was married and then was effectively forcibly divorced by judicial fiat. Told that they were no longer married to their spouse, told that their family was no longer a family because of the ideological commitments of people wearing black robes on that bench. Would we be able to think of that as fairly reasoned? Maybe she would. I don't think I would. And I guess I would just hold her to that. If she's going to be a part of the majority, stripping away a right to choose, a right to vote, a right to get health care, and maybe even a right to be married from people whose well-being and whose lives depend on her interpretation of judicial philosophy.
And I want to read one more section from her opening statement. In this, she says, courts have a vital responsibility to enforce the rule of law, which is critical to a free society. But courts are not designed to solve every problem or right every wrong in our public life. The policy decisions and value judgments of government must be made by the political branches elected by and accountable to the people. The public should not expect courts to do so, and courts should not try. Just reading that, Pete, that troubles me beyond words. Your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is what nominees do. They write the most seemingly unobjectionable, dry stuff. But really what I see in there is a pathway to judicial activism cloaked in judicial humility. At the end of the day, rights in this country have been expanded because courts have understood what the true meaning of the letter of the law and the spirit of the Constitution is. And that is not about time traveling yourself back to the 18th century and subjecting yourself to the same prejudices and limitations as the people who write these words. The Constitution is a living document because the English language is a living language. And you need to have some readiness to understand that in order to serve on the court in a way that's actually going to make life better. It was actually Thomas Jefferson himself who said that we might as well ask a man to still wear the coat which fitted him when he was a boy as expect future generations to live under what he called the regime of their barbarous ancestors. So even the founders that these kind of dead-hand originalists claim fidelity to understood better than their ideological descendants, today's judicial so-called conservatives, the importance of keeping with the times. And we deserve judges and justices who understand that.
Pete, I can't let you go without talking about your book, Trust. Why did you write it, and why do you feel it's important to get this out now?
Well, I thought it was important for this book to start some conversations before Election Day because we really are in a trust emergency in the United States. We have a threefold crisis of trust. Trust among the people in our institutions and our government, trust among American people in one another, and trust around the world in America itself. All of these can be measured, and all of these have plummeted. The problem is the crises that we're facing, the challenges that are going to decide how the 2020s go and really decide how the rest of the century goes for us, are challenges that can't be solved without a high degree of cooperation. We're living through one right now. We're not going to deal with this pandemic without cooperation. Science alone can't do it without a human factor too. Science can tell us that we ought to wear a mask, but we have to decide to actually do it. Science can develop a vaccine, but we have to have enough trust in the process to be willing to actually get it. And by the way, I'd be the first in line to get a safe and effective vaccine for COVID-19. And what's true for the pandemic is also true for things like climate change and even just coming together to invest in better infrastructure and education and health and the things we're going to need as a country. The challenges require cooperation. Cooperation requires trust. And so we've got to build up our sources of trust and make our institutions more trustworthy so that people don't wonder when they're deciding whether to vote or whether to participate, whether their voice will even be heard.
Pete Buttigieg, from one gay married man to another, happy National Coming Out Day. My best to your better half.
Thank you. Likewise.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you very much. Coming up, Trump's long history of financial malfeasance becomes an even stickier wicket. But as we go to break, here's a special performance by a virtual all-queer choir in honor of National Coming Out Day.
Look out, 'cause here I